I lost your audio. Randy, I lost
Here we
your,
go.
okay, I lost your audio for some reason.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and start up again. Welcome to the channel. Once again, I'm Randy Broussard, and have a very, very special guest with me today. It's an honor to welcome Mr. John Barbour, Canadian actor, comedian, television host who's worked extensively in the United States. The only performer in TV to win Emmys for both entertainment and news shows. He is very well known, mostly well known for hosting the reality television series Real People, kind of a trailblazer as far as that is concerned. He's also creator and co-producer. And he's had lots of success in television and film. Later in his career, he kind of redirected his efforts and decided to pursue and investigate the Kennedy assassination, which I certainly want to dwell into today. He's had some successful documentaries. 1992, he wrote, directed the JFK assassination, Jim Garrison tapes, along with the second assassination of President Kennedy in the media, which is, I certainly recommend everyone to buy it or certainly watch it. It's very enlightening. And just recently, he produced John Barbour and William Shakespeare's Last Word on the Murder of John Kennedy. It's a captivating 70-minute film. Takes you on a journey through the life of Jim Garrison, and it's humorous, informative. He shares his own incredible rags to riches story in show business while recounting his 53 years effort to tell Jim Garrison's story. Mr. Barbour, thank you so much. It's an honor for you to be with me today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be with you, Randy. I read your stuff all the time. First time I've ever looked at you and talked to you.
Right.
I'm more than honored that you are still interested in the murder of John Kennedy, and especially in Jim Garrison's solved and sabotage investigation. So I appreciate it really, really deeply. The second documentary is called The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And the third one that you just mentioned that I did is called John Barbour's and William Shakespeare's Last Word on the Murder of President John F. Kennedy. Again, thank you so much for having me here. And I didn't pursue Mr. Garrison at all, not in the least. As a matter of fact,
It was by accident, right?
You know what, Randy? All the wonderful things that happened to me in my life were accidents. I mean, meeting my wife, it was my second performance as a stand-up comedian at the famous Hungry Eye nightclub in San Francisco. And that's where I met my wife. She was a band singer for famous jazz pianist Earl Hines, used to be in the Louis Armstrong Sextet. Best dancer I ever saw outside of Eleanor Powell and Ginger Rogers. And she ran off with me when I was an unemployed comic, but that was an accident. Getting my very first morning show, the AM show in Los Angeles, which was the most successful morning show in the local morning show in the history of television, again was an accident. And also meeting and getting involved with Mr. Garrison was an accident.
How did that happen? I'm really interested in how you
well, first
called
off,
him. I think the conversation you had on the phone. And
did you ever read my book? Did I ever send you a copy of my book?
My mother was not a virgin. Is that
Yeah, did you ever read it?
No, I just heard about it.
Oh,
I want to read it.
Well, listen, I'm telling you, this is the cover of it, okay?
Right.
Your mother's not a virgin. The bumpy life and times of the Canadian dropout who changed the face of American television. And it's the best book you will ever read about anybody in show business, mark my words. And a friend of mine who was a reviewer for the New York Times said the New York Times and the Washington Post would never review my book because what I do is I support Jim Garrison. And it was a New York Times that, of course, published the Warren Report, and that's what they stand by. But again, I got involved with Mr. Garrison by accident. Mm-hmm. And that's how the title of the book came up, Randy. I was, let's see, I was 37 years of age when I got the AM show. I came from a very dysfunctional and broken family in Toronto long before it was popular. And the fights between my mother and my father were so brutal. My father thought it'd be easier to take on the Nazis. So in 1939, he joined the Canadian Army and never came back. I mean, he got the Order of the British Empire, ended up becoming a very successful advertising. He owned an advertising agency in Scotland. And in 1960, as you saw in the third documentary, I went back there and found him, but we didn't get along at all. So that was the end of that. But I was on the streets when I was 6 years of age, and I was living mostly being Canadian at hockey rinks or in movie theaters where I could see a double feature for a nickel. And I fell in love with American movies. Okay. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Okay.
I've seen that so many times.
Yeah. So I wanted to, be in a country like that. And so I came here illegally when I was 17. I was deported then. I came back again. I was deported again. So I was deported twice.
Oh.
And I'm not going to get into that story now, but it's a really hilarious and interesting story in the book, because in 1977, I had my citizenship papers given to me by Senator John Tunney in California. So in any event, I accidentally get the AM show. I'm 37 and I'm paying so it was 1970. And it's 1 year after Jim Garrison loses the conspiracy case against Clay Shaw.
Right.
So I believe the government, as Jim Garrison once did, as you will hear.
And most people did.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, who would doubt that the government would lie to us? And who would doubt even more that the media would lie to us? Dan Rather would, oh yeah, I just wrote a joke in my Facebook page about Dan Rather has just made a JFK bobblehead doll where the head goes forward violently. So anyway, that's what I do. I put jokes on my face. In any event, Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw in 1967.
Right.
And like everybody in America and in the world, well, not in Europe, the Europeans doubted the assassination before Americans did. I thought the government was telling me the truth. But what was happening is that for 2 years, the government and the media kept stopping Garrison from getting into court. Now, I'm a kid of the streets. So I say to my friends who unfriend me, there's something wrong here, because if he's a kook and he has nothing, why don't they let him get into court and fall on his ass? But he had it solved, but we didn't know that. So I didn't book him, but I did read Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment, which just castrated the Warren Report legally. And I thought, well, God, look at this book is brilliant. It shows all the lies in the Warren Report. The Warren Report should be in a library under the fiction section. And I thought when lawyers read that and, they would jump up in defense of Mark Lane and look into the corruption and the lies in the government and the Warren Report. Nobody said anything. Now, I wasn't bookmark Lane because in those days they had what they called the fairness doctrine. And if you had a Republican on, you had a Democrat on. So all I could do, for example, I was one of the few people that would put Muhammad Ali on the air. 99% of all Americans wanted that man in a grave because he said, I have nothing against yellow people. I have only something against white people in America. I am not going to Vietnam. Also, Jane Fonda, who became known as Hanoi Jane, spoke up violently against the war. Because if I said something, then they had to have somebody on who was for the war at the time, people like Bob Hope and everybody else in America.
Times have changed.
Oh my, have they ever? For the worse, actually, because the fairness doctrine is all gone because of Jim Garrison. And we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
And in any event, one day, I'm in a bookstore called Edmunds Bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard. And there's a book called Heritage of Stone. And the author is Jim Garrison. So I pick it up and I look at the opening couple of pages. I stay there for 4 hours, Randy, reading the whole book. I mean, I learned that he had to take Time Life to the Supreme Court to get the Zapruder film to show the jury. And the Zapruder film that they sent him was so blurred he can't show it. A friend of mine, Stephen Jaffe, who is the last living investigator of Jim Garrison's, went to Paris and got from the French a clear copy of the Zapruder film.
Really?
Also, there was a forensic pathologist named Fink who was called by the defense. And on cross-examination, he said there was no autopsy because guys in uniform stopped it. And one of the main ones was a guy named Curtis LeMay, who absolutely loathed Kennedy. And they argued all the time because LeMay was one of the insane ones who supported Operation Northwoods and dropping nuclear bombs on Vietnam. I mean, that's how crazy these are. John Lennon said, I think we are run by a bunch of lunatics. And that line's in one of my films.
I saw it in your video, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, I get home, I get up real early in the morning and I look up New Orleans District Attorney and I dial it and I expect a lady's voice to answer and it says bass baritone. And I said, hi, could I speak to Mr. Garrison, please? And he said, this is he.
Really?
Yeah. Oh my God, I got so excited. Oh, Mr. Garrison, I just read your book, Heritage of Stone. And he chuckled and he said, oh, John, you must be the other one. I only sold 2. It's a lie. It was a bestseller.
Yeah, right.
And then I said, I would love to have you come on my show. I have a 90-minute morning show in Los Angeles. I would love to talk to you for half an hour. Then we'll open up the phones for another hour because thousands of people here want to talk to you. We haven't seen you on television. And he said, well, you're not going to see me on your show either. I said, why? You don't want to come on? He says, no, it'll cost you your job. Have you ever seen me on television? I said, no, not really. And he said, well, you're never going to see me on television because, there's an ancient Persian proverb that says, if you're going to tell the truth, you better have one foot in the saddle. I mean, he was really very funny. So I finally talked him into it when I said, listen, I had just won my first Emmy. And he giggled. And he said, oh, you said you just won your first one. You're expecting to win more. Now, Randy, who wouldn't love somebody like that?
Right.
So when he agreed to do the show, he said, John, it's 1970. It's only a few years after the Warren Report. Do you know that the latest Harris survey says that 82% of all Americans do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did it or did it alone? And I said, well, Mr. Garrison, if so many Americans believe that, why aren't they storming the barricades of Bull in Washington? He said, well, you didn't see the second question. And I said, well, what's the second question? The second question was, would you like to see another investigation, a deeper investigation, in which both the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI are investigated? And I said, well, he said, what do you think the percentage wanted to see that? I said, 60, 70? He said, 22%. I said, what? He says, what does that tell you about the cowardice of Americans? And I said, well, listen, I'll tell you what it says to me, Mr. Garrison. I know what my mother and father did in the rumble seat of the car, or on the pool table, or in the alley, or in the bedroom to conceive me. But don't ever tell me my mother's not a virgin. Well, he absolutely howled. He says, that's just like Mark Twain. He says, my favorite American writer. And boy, could he, his favorite writer was Shakespeare, because if you see the book Heritage of Stone, all the titles are right out of Shakespeare. And that's why the title of my third book. And so that's how I got the title for this, because when I got around to writing the book, I couldn't get over the fact that he loved that comment so much about your mother not being a virgin. So I book him on the show, and I'm immediately fired. Immediately. Now I have the #1 show, and a couple of the things that but I must tell you, Randy, I didn't think it had anything to do with conspiracies about Kennedy. I thought that's show business. You know, you get a job for 13 weeks, you get a job for a year, you get a job for a day. But when we chatted, he was so interesting, because while he lost the conspiracy case, because nobody knew what the CIA was in 1969, for God's sake, you know, it's all James Bond stuff.
Clandestine operations.
Yeah, but what he did, he got 10 years of Shaw's tax records, and he's paid by the CIA. That's still not enough to convince a jury, but he got him on perjury, because Shaw claimed he didn't know Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferry, and Garrison had over 87 witnesses. And in 8 minutes, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. But the government stepped in to stop the next investigation, because they knew that, as did Jim Garrison, that Clay Shaw would cave in with the witnesses that Garrison had. When Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw was one of the most prominent social figures and successful businessmen in New Orleans.
Right.
But he had the most deviant, perverted lifestyle. And in both films, you see when he's arrested with all this sadomasochistic homosexual paraphernalia. I mean, it's really ugly. And Mr. Garrison said to his staff, you are not going to tell anybody in the media about this, because this has nothing to do with his involvement in the murder. That's his private lifestyle. But here are a couple of things that he had. He had 4 $20 male hookers on record, under oath, saying they were paid $20 to have homosexual sex with Clay Shaw, Lee Harvey Oswald, David Ferry, and a couple of other people, okay?
Right.
And he also had testimony from a professor in Illinois whose best friend of homosexual lived with Clay Shaw for a year until he had a transgender operation. And then Clay Shaw kicked him out because he didn't want to be sleeping with a woman anymore. And he also...
Never heard that one before.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's all in the book. And then the other thing is, he had a written document verified under oath that he'd been offered $25,000 by David Ferry and Clay Shaw to murder Jim Garrison, $25,000 $15,000 down and $10,000 afterwards.
Who do they offer that to? I'm sorry.
I forget the guy's name, but it's in the book.
Okay.
And in any event, he went to Mr. Garrison because for this reason. The reason he thought about accepting the money, his daughter was deathly ill, and the CIA promised him the best doctors in the world to cure her if he would murder Jim Garrison. But he thought the death of the country was more important than the death of his daughter. So he went to Mr. Garrison. So there is another witness. So Garrison knew that if Clay Shaw got on the witness stand and all of these people came forward to point out what a deviant homosexual he was, it'd be like a Perry Mason episode where he jumps up at the end and said, "Oh, I did it, I was involved." So that the government knew that, and that's why a short while later he mysteriously died of a heart attack. I mean, Jim Garrison was so brilliant. He even found out the name of the guy who ordered Jack Ruby to murder Lee Harvey Oswald. It was simple CSI work. He got the phone numbers of David Ferry, Clay Shaw, for the 3 months prior to the assassination, and they all led to a number in Chicago that was owned where a woman named, I think her name was Zaire, lived, and the rent was paid for by, oh my God, what was his name? Oh, I forget. Because at one time I said to Mr. Garrison, if you were now the Attorney General, who would you arrest? And he said, and he gave me 3 names. Well, this one name that he gave me happens to be in the Warren Report, and he was at the Cabana Motel. It's in the Warren Report, in the Cabana Motel, having lunch with Jack Ruby, and that's when he told Jack Ruby that he had to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'll tell you how Garrison was converted. He was in the FBI.
Right.
He was in the military. The one picture in his office was him at, I think it was Dachau. He was one of the early liberators of that camp. And he has a note under it said, "Never again." He had an accidental meeting with Hale Boggs. Do you know who Hale Boggs was?
Actually, I'm from Louisiana, so
oh, well, good. Okay, so he was a
I
congressman.
know exactly who he is. Right?
Okay, so he was the only dissenting member of the Warren Commission, and it's never published in the Warren Commission.
Right.
So he meets Jim on the plane, and he says, "Jim, you know I'm a hunter, and I'm telling you that kid with that Dago rifle with that crooked scope couldn't shoot a dead rabbit." And so Garrison said, "You mean?" He said, "Yes, I mean." So Garrison got 3 sets of the 26 volumes of the Warren Report, one in the car, one in the office, and memorized them. Now, Hale Boggs, if you remember, went before Congress, and it's in the congressional record. We need to get rid of J. Edgar Hoover. We have to investigate the CIA and the FBI in the murders of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King, both of them, all in the congressional record. Then a few months later, he is driven to the airport and he gets in a private plane. It crashes and disappears in Alaska. You know who drives him to the airport?
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. He and his wife were recruited by the CIA when they were in college. They sent Clinton to England to be sort of a Rhodes Scholar or something, but he was just a spy.
He's not squeaky clean at all.
No, he is absolutely the worst president in the history of this country. And this is not an opinion, it's all fact. I have a YouTube that says the 10.5 worst presidents in American history.
Okay, I like that.
Okay. And I must tell you, I couldn't get Donald Trump in there. And I am absolutely no fan of Donald Trump. So they were 10 and a half worse than Donald Trump. And the other thing about Mr. Garrison, oh my God, I could talk about him forever. I'm such.
Go ahead, as long as you want.
Okay, so anyway, there's no question. David Talbot wrote a book about the Devil's Chessboard, and he said that was what's the guy's name? The CIA, Allen Dulles, the guy responsible for the murder of John Kennedy. He is not responsible for the murder of John Kennedy. He was the engineer. Allen Dulles was just a hireling by the 10 or 12 families that literally own the country. And when I interviewed Mr. Garrison I should tell you, I lost my show, obviously, trying to tell his story, but we talked 2 or 3 times on the phone. When Watergate came up, we would chat, and all the same names involved with Watergate, involved with the murder. And I was, for 4.5 years, Frank Sinatra's private writer. And when Frank Sinatra hosted the Tonight Show one night, I was the first person he called on to be a guest to do a stand-up. My mentor when I started as a comic was Red Fox.
Red Fox, okay.
And I was the first one to put him on entertainment television, which led to Sanford and Son. That's his real name, John Sanford.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and he called himself Fred because his older brother was Fred, and he died. But Red was my only lifelong friend. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you can YouTube me doing my stand-up with Sinatra. And also, when they did the roast of Red Fox on Dean Martin, a hilarious story about how I ended up doing that, which we won't get into. Now I'm trying to find out exactly. Oh, yeah, when I interviewed. Okay, so now I get real people. Again, quite by accident. A magnificent story. The most successful show in the history of American television and the most original.
Absolutely.
Okay. And when I got it, my wife said to me, what do you think is going to happen to television now? I said, well, first of all, every writer and actor in Hollywood's going to hate me because they're not going to be needed anymore. And I said, the Real People was like opening a fresh bottle of Lafite Rothschild French wine. Oh, God, it's delicious. But if you leave that wine out for 20 or 30 years, it turns to vinegar. Yeah. Well, reality television has turned to absolute shit. I mean, when I had to get into television,
I never watch it today.
Well, you can't watch it. But when I got it, I was inspired to get into television because of Jack Paar.
Right.
The greatest late night talk show host, but he opened his show doing a funny monologue. So I figured I have to become a comic. And I became a comic.
Right.
And I did so. Oh, we're not going to have time to tell you all these stories. But first, when we end this, you email me your address. I'm going to send you an autographed copy of the book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Because
I'll cherish that for the rest of my life.
Oh, my God. It is.
I've heard a lot about it.
It is unbelievably good. Okay. Okay. I could tell you know who Mike Farrell is?
Mike Farrell. Huh?
He's the second star of MASH.
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So 2.5 weeks.
It sounded familiar. I mean,
yeah. Okay. 2.5 years ago. It's on a Sunday. I remember it very clearly. I'm lying in bed and I'm reading something and the phone rings. I say, hello. Say, John Barbour? I said, yes. This is Mike Farrell. I said, hold it. Mike Farrell from MASH. He says, that's right. And he said, I'm here with my wife. Now, his wife was in 5 Elvis Presley movies. She was very famous. He said, my wife and I are here in our bedroom, standing up, each taking turns reading your book to one another, laughing and crying. And when I am done with this, I'm going to write you the greatest review you ever read. If you go to Amazon, every review is 5 stars. Every single one of them. That's how much you like that book. Anyway, back to Garrison.
Yes.
I have real people. And one day, it was in 1981, early 81.
But this is after the AM Los Angeles show.
Yeah, well, I lost that in
You
7.
lost out in the 7. Okay.
Now this is 11 years later, when everybody thought I was going to be out of the business. Now I'm the biggest star in America with and so I read in the paper that the House Select Committee has found a dictabelt from a motorcycle driver that records more than 4 shots being fired in Dealey Plaza. So they have no choice but to conclude that there was a conspiracy.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I called Mr. Garrison and I said, Mr. Garrison, do you feel vindicated? And this is how wonderfully he answered. He said, John, I feel like a blind man who's gotten a very small trophy in a dark room, only I know I got it. I said, well, listen, Mr. Garrison, it's more than a trophy. I have the most successful show in America, and nobody's going to fire me from this show. I'm going to come down there. I'm going to tell your story. I go down there, and I put them on camera for 3.5 hours.
Okay.
Oh, my God. So that was a lot of the... Now, I
didn't realize you interviewed him twice.
Yeah, but this time it was on camera.
It was on camera, okay.
Yeah, but you know how smart he was as an attorney. He said, John, at some point, I want you to turn off the mics and the camera because I don't like to speculate, but I'm going to speculate. Everybody thinks it was Allen Dulles, okay, who decided to kill John Kennedy. Allen Dulles was just taking orders.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean? I said, during the 30s, his bank, the Dulles Bank, gave Hitler $3 million, for God's sake. So he must be one of the ruling families. He said, no, he's not. He's just a hireling. He said, there are many mega millionaires in this country who are just hirelings. It's the mega billionaires that own this country, and they work for the billionaires. He said...
And own the media, too, but go ahead, I'm sorry.
But yes, they own everything. And he said it was Averell Harriman. And do you know who Averell Harriman was?
No, I don't think so.
Averell Harriman was 72 years of age. He was known as the Crocodile, and he was Kennedy's military advisor. But he was placed there to be the eyes of the CIA and the military. And at the time, there were 1,200 what they called volunteers or whatever in Vietnam that Eisenhower had placed there. And we have on camera John Kennedy saying, we're going to bring back 1,000 a month. 1964, they won't be anymore. And that was it. Oh my God, I'm so proud of my own films. So in any event, Averell Harriman kept telling Kennedy to put more advisors in, and Kennedy kept saying no to this older man. I mean, Kennedy's only 45 or 46. This guy's 72, and Harriman hates him because he thinks he's too progressive or too liberal.
Right.
So anyway, he goes to he writes a memo, and it's memo number 243. You can look it up. You can Google it. He sends a memo to Henry Cabot Lodge and the CIA in Vietnam, telling them to murder Diem, who was Kennedy's best friend and would be the one who would help Ho Chi Minh neutralize the country and adopted a constitution similar to the American Constitution when the Americans and the French and all the rest are out of there.
Right.
And the CIA murders DM. 3 weeks later, they murdered Kennedy.
Same people.
And Bobby Kennedy finds the memo after his brother is killed and goes insane. They almost get into a fist fight. And Harriman goes to the New York Times and said that the Kennedys were insane. The Kennedys were insane.
Just had to say that.
Yeah.
And we only have about a minute left. I'm sorry, Mr. Barbour.
Oh, that's all? Oh, my God.
We could have gone on and on.
Oh, I could. Yes. Well, we may just have to continue it. But I would, again, I would recommend. I'm going to show you the book again. It's called Your Mother's.
How can people get in touch with you? And I want to talk to you again, but.
Well, they can get in touch with me on my Facebook page.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me is my Facebook page. Or you can go to my website, which is www.johnbarbersworld.com. You will see the first documentary for nothing, and you will see dozens and dozens of the greatest tapes ever. Nobody in television has on their website the magnificent material that I have that's both informative.
I'm going to do that. Thank you so much, Mr. Barbour. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, Randy, thank you. Send me your address. I'll send you an autographed copy.
Thank you.